My name is Ilya Egorov, and I'm a researcher at the RANEPA School of Contemporary Humanitarian Studies. In today's short lecture, I will introduce you to the main facts of the history of and sociolinguistic situation and the structure of the Khanty language. It is part of the Uralic family. So the relatives of the Khanty language are settled in Russia, Finland, Hungary, and Estonia. These are such groups of languages as Sami, Baltic Finnish, Moldovan, Permian, Mari, and Samoyed languages. The closest relative is the Mansi language and Hungarian. The closest relative is the Mansi language, and together with Khanty language, they form the so-called Ob-Ugric or Ugric group of languages. The Oxford Guide to Uralic Languages, published in 2021, this is the most recent classification. Sometimes the Ob-Ugric unity is questioned, and the Khanty-Mansi language as well. Now we are discussing the difficulties here. What is the language? What is the notion of the language? Sometimes experts say that they form an areal language. The next issue is the relationship between Ob-Ugric languages and the Hungarian language. The traditional classifications treated them as a single genetic group. So the Ugric language is divided into Proto-Ugric and then Hungarian and Ob-Ugric. And if we look at the map, that we can see the spread and distribution of the Uralic languages. It was done by Yanni Sarikvi, and this map appeared in the Oxford Guide to the Uralic Languages. So marked on the map is the distribution zone of the native speakers of the Khanty and the Hungarian languages. Downstream of the Ob River, along its tributaries, the Irtysh, Vakhu, Vasya-Yugan, and Kazim. These oval markings denote the ancestral homeland of Hungarians, Mansi, and Khanty. We see that it was to the south of the current location, and at some point Hungarians migrated further along the steppe corridor, while Mansi and Khanty from the steppe zone moved further to the north to the forest steppe zone. We also see some traces of the fact that Mansi and Khanty lived a slightly different ways of life. Previously, in their folklore, which is very widely represents the stories and plots related to horses. And of course, the horse breeding is very traditional in this area. And the epic heroes of the Khanty and Mansi are the horse breeders. And besides, Khanty had bows, and they were wearing them not on their backs, but on their belts, as the horse hunters do. These two ethnographic facts indicate that at some point in time, Khanty and Mansi somewhat changed their way of life, along with emigration far to the north. On this slide, we see a tree of Khanty and Mansi dialects, which is built by the use of methods of lexicostatistics. That is a comparison method. And here we see, here's the ob-ugric knot, which is dividing or breaking up. And this happened about 800 years BC. And of course, we are collecting more modern, more updated information, and we need to make adjustments to this facts, but we use these dates as approximate dates for our orientation. And here we can see two nodes. The Mansi node, which breaks up into separate dialects in the 1st century of our age, and the Khanty node, which breaks up in the last centuries BC. That was about 300 years BC. This depth is quite comparable to the Slavic family of languages. And as I already said, it is even deeper. How deep is the difference? How radical is the difference between the Khanty dialects? We can look at this situation using this slide, which you can see on the screen, and we can see the paradigm of the word house or home in the Surgut dialect and Kazim dialect. The Uralic languages are known for quite significant of inventories of cases. Sometimes there are 10, 15, even 16 cases. And these are quite typical for some language subgroups. The Khanty language is not like that. We see the Surgut dialect, which has only 9 cases for native speakers of Russian. For English speakers, it may seem to be a lot, but by Ural standards, it's quite a modest inventory. And we can also look at Kazim dialect, where nouns have only 3 cases versus 9 in Surgut. Among the experts, the linguists and specialists, and among ordinary people who do not deal specifically with the languages, it is customary to talk and discuss the Khanty language, which is divided into a number of dialects, as may be the case of other languages. But there is a different approach to this language. It would be probably fair to analyze or consider the Khanty language as a continuum of dialects or a continuum of languages, where we can distinguish far apart unities. So the entire distribution zone of the Khanty language is divided into 3 zones or 3 parts. The North Khanty dialects are in yellow, marked in yellow. Green marks the East Khanty dialects, and red or orange is the Southern Khanty dialect. Eastern Khanty dialects are sometimes called Khantyk language, because quite often it sounds not like a Khanty, but as Khanty, Kants. These 3 languages are absolutely not, they do not understand each other, they do not overlap. The speakers of Kazim dialect, that's the North Khanty language, absolutely cannot understand the speakers of the neighboring dialect, Surgut dialect, or the East Khantyk Khantyk language. They have to learn the Surgut dialect as a foreign language, and there is a certain contact zone in the upper reaches of the Kazim River, where the speakers of the Kazim and Surgut dialects often communicate, but they have to communicate mostly in Russian. The Russian language is the language of communication. So the distance between these two dialects is quite equivalent to the distance between the Slavic languages. And of course, we can understand some phrases or words in Polish or Czech languages. But in general, these are foreign languages for us Russians. And despite all the similarities, we have to learn the phonetics, the vocabulary, and grammar. Exactly what happens to the dialects of the Khanty language. On this map, we can see that a certain territory along the Ob River, and it is shaded in solid color. And that's a territory seems to be quite substantial. I suggest to look at a different map. Let's look at this map, and it reflects the state of affairs more truthfully, closer to life. Here we can see not only the Khanty language, but to the west we can see the areal of the Mansi language. And these small colored circles, they mark the real distribution zones of the native speakers of the Khanty language. So we can see that the density of the Khanty population is in fact quite low. And we can see smaller dots here, for instance, along the Kazim River. That's a concentration of Khantys around certain settlements. In principle, the villages and settlements is not a typical way of life for Khantys. Usually they moved between different sites throughout the year with their deer. And the settlements and villages and small towns begin to emerge in the Soviet times. And of course it was easier to manage the territory. There was certain local administration, but still a village or a settlement is not typical for native speakers of Khanty. Most Khantys used to live in their camps, and they met only for special occasions like holidays or for some special events. Here on this map, we can see a fairly dense concentration of native speakers of the Khanty language in the north. So these are the speakers of North Khanty dialects. But where it was traditionally a zone of the South Khanty language, we see no circles, no markings, just you can see this. I showed this with the arrow. And these are the migrants of not southern Khanty, but rather East Khanty dialects. So practically no South Khanty dialect speakers left. We would say that South Khanty dialects could and should be considered as completely extinct. In general, the social linguistic situation of Khanty dialects is quite different. They differ from each other. We have recently just discussed the extinct southern Khanty dialect, but on the other hand, we see quite an active development of the Kazim dialect of North Khanty language, which tries to become the main literary norm of Khanty people. We can also see that Eastern Khantys have a fairly good command of the language, although in general the situation is that more than 30,000 people consider themselves as ethnic Khantys. Speaking about the development of the language, the first attempts of writing in Khanty language were made only in the middle of the 19th century. The Gospel was translated into the Shirkar or Abdorsky dialect of North Khanty language. In the 19th century, the tradition of writing was not established, and the writing began to be established, created anew, already in the Soviet times, under the Soviet Union in the 1930s, along with the writing language of other peoples of the USSR. And here we can see the headline of Khanty Mansi shop, which could be called as local Pravda newspaper. And the traditional name of Khanty was Ostyaks. That's why it's called Ostyako-Vagulskaya Pravda. And Mansi were called Vaguls. So, and accordingly, the city, which is now called Khanty-Mansiysk, the capital of the region, was called Ostyako-Vaguls. Hence is the name of the newspaper, Pravda of Ostyako-Vagulsk, Ostyako-Vagulskaya Pravda. And as you know, very soon, quite soon after the establishment of the Soviet Union, the Latin-based writing was curtailed. It was also accompanied by certain repressions against those who supported the Latin-based alphabet. In case of Khanty, these attempts were made by a German, Wolfgang Steinitz, who unfortunately was not at the Soviet Union at the time of repressions against the linguists. And that was his fortune. And after a while, in the second half of the 1930s, Khanty writing appeared on a Cyrillic basis. And since then, different dialects of the Khanty language used different versions of the Cyrillic alphabet with additional letters, naturally, because Khanty phonetics differs from the Russian language. So it was quite difficult to express the transcription of the Khanty language using just pure Russian letters. Additional letters were required. One of the most vital dialects, which claims to become practically the only literary language, is the Kazim dialect. And our weekly newspaper Khanty Yasang is currently published in the Kazim dialect. And of course there are regular publications in the Surgut dialect. The situation with Shurishkirsky dialect is a little bit more complicated, though there are certain publications in in this dialect as well. The situation with the Vakhovo-Vyugan dialect is even more complicated. Though literary standards and spelling standards were developed by scientists and researchers from Khanty, Mansi and Tomsk. Further, in my lecture, I would like to discuss the Kazim dialect per se. Your humble servant has an opportunity to study the language in the field. So let's get back to the map. Here, marked in yellow, this is a North Khanty language. And along the Kazim River, we have Kazim dialect, which and this dialect is absolutely not homogeneous. It is divided into Ust Kazim dialect, Lower Kazim, and Upper Kazim dialects. The center of Kazim Khantis is the village or settlement of Kazim, where we conduct our research. Paradoxically, it is not on the Kazim River, but on the Amnaya River. And it was previously called Amnyavosh in Khanty language. So Kazim Khanty live almost everywhere, and in fact the city of Khanty-Mansisk, which traditionally is in the distribution zone of South Khanty dialects, it is also, it has become a place of compact residence for speakers of Kazim dialect, and of course speakers of several other dialects. Many of them live and work in the Ob-Ugric Institute of Applied Research and Development, or in the House of Center of Folk Art. Here, there are some photos from our field life, from our work, and you can see bilingual signs here in the central photo in Russian and Khanty. In addition to Russian and Khanty, Komi language is also used. They have quite a fairly representative community of Komi Izhimites. And some Khanty people also speak Komi because they learned this language when they worked in joint teams, joint reindeer herding teams. So it often happened that two families live in the same tent, and one family could be Khanty and another is Komi Siberian. And that's how the children learned both languages, and they were basically bilingual, speaking both languages interchangeably. So we work not only in the village, but in the camp. But when there is no field season, when we have classes at the university, we still continue our work using Zoom. And in fact, the field season never ends. My colleagues, and it's a great honor for me to work with them. They work in different institutions in Moscow, universities, primarily at the Higher School of Linguistics, Higher School of Economics, and the Department of Theoretical and Applied Linguistics of the Moscow State University. In recent years, we had substantial, significant student expeditions for some reason, and that's why it would be good in the near future to publish a new modern grammar of the Kazim dialect of the Khanty language. I now suggest you, before we move to discuss linguistic phenomena, to listen to how the sound of this language. You will hear a song, recording of a song, and this is Zoya Nikiforovna Lazamova. She's our colleague. She was involved in collecting folklore and lexical materials, and as a result of her efforts, we published a Khanty language dictionary, Khanty Russian dictionary. Let's listen to the sound of the language.
Похорони, миленький, тункиантаялде, сотхасланги картам кара, хотхари ямонхасоле, хотхари яонетале, марвошани мигой бохленки, сотхасланги ямхоти.
So this is the sound, the melody of the language. So let's look at what are the instruments used for making the sounds of the language. And we see that there is no opposition of sonority and deafness. There are only certain phonemes that may sound quite loud. The interesting sounds are the diff, sa and sa. We will discuss them a little bit later. And there is a nasal sound. All possible articulations are filled. I'm showing you these sounds. So some of these sounds just disappear in many dialects. And the dialect of Zoya Nikiforovna, which you just heard, these sounds are preserved. It sounds to English combination of ng. What is designated by Russian letter H sounds like this. Not an easy sound for Russian speakers. So lateral sounds are quite rare for the languages of Eurasia, especially for the north of Eurasia. You can find them in the Caucasian mountains, in some places in America, but they're quite rare in Siberia and Europe. They can be found in the neighboring Nenets language. And this is exactly where we can see the influence of Khanty dialects. In Kazimsky, it is presented, this sound, and there are two varieties of this lateral. There's alveolar and lotal. I will try to reproduce these sounds for you. So the first is year, and the second is the sledges. And the second sound means to put heat the oven, put fire in the oven, and another, it means promise. And as already mentioned, the Kazim dialect is heterogeneous, and we can see this variance of pronunciation. And there is a word war, which has two sounds at once. This is Kazim uprising or Kazim war. So, making exercises in pronouncing such sound, it's quite difficult for a Russian speaker because we don't have these sounds in our language. It's quite interesting and maybe even useful. So if you want to master the Khanty language, for this purpose, we record it and put it on YouTube channel. It is called the Country of Languages project. It's a small master-class. So, Country of the Languages. Please, you're welcome to see how Kazim phonetics sound. Now let's look at the vowels. In Russian we have 5 vowels, phonemes. Here we can see them, how many? 9. If I'm not mistaken. Yes. So there are 9 vowels, phonemes. Well, nothing exotic. Upper middle, lower left, front middle, back row. And of course, there can be tense and non-tense. Sometimes it can be viewed as long and short sounds. But I think it would be justified to view them as by tension, tense, and not so tense. And here the pairs: empty, winter, photography, true, Tsar, and when. The word Tsar, of course, it's borrowing from the Turkic languages. And of course, the Khanty dialect was in contact with the Turkic languages. And then we can see a cave and a fawn, a young deer. At the phonological level, it is such an innovation of the Kazim dialect, which is not present in other dialects, even in the North Khanty language. In Abdorsky dialect, this is not present. Now, as for the grammar, it seems at first glance that morphology is quite simple and straightforward. The noun has numbers, 3 numbers, singular, dual, and plural. Then there is a case. There are only 3 cases: accusative, dative, and local. And in the pronoun, there is a separate accusative case, but there is no local case. So it's a little bit complicated situation with cases in Kazim Khanty language. And there is also a category of belonging. And there are special indicators that allow you to determine who owns the item, the thing. But doesn't work that easy. The verbs have different object and subject conjugations. So it means that you can give information not only about the person and the number of but also of the subject, but also the number of the object. There are only two tenses, present and past, and there are only two moods, indicative and imperative. Of course, there is a conditional mood, but it's used with different particles are used to express the conditional mood. There are, of course, active and passive tense voices, and there is three numbers and three faces. At first glance, the system is quite simple, but let's look at the real situation. It is not as simple as it seems. Some kind of dress is on a chair. And we can see the word dress, which has no additional indicators. And if we want to say that it is your dress is on the chair, then we have to add a pronoun. Your dress is on the chair. And your as meaning is expressed with the help of a pronoun and with the help of special ending of the word dress. Now let's look at the next example. Petya convinced the boy to build a house. And again we see the indicator of belonging of the second person singular. So if we translate it word for word, it would be your Petya convinced his boy to build a house. Seems quite strange. It probably will be your dog, though maybe it's not your dog at all, started barking at me. It barked at me. Here, the indicators of belonging, of possession, do not work in this possessive sense. They rather mean a certainty. If we call Petya, it means that we know this person. We know his name. And when we say that he convinced the boy to build a house, we probably mean some particular specific boy. And in this case, we see a special object conjugation in the verb convince. So a certain boy should be marked not only with a possessive indicator, but a special ending in the verb. What if it was Petya's hobby to convince boys to build houses, and there were some unknown boys? If we added some word here, then the object indicator would simply disappear from the verb. Hence, the indicators of belonging and possession, the Khanty language, marks certainty and uncertainty, definite or indefinite. Another interesting phenomenon of the language is the mirative. It's a new and unexpected action. It is formed from the participle added by different numerical indicators. Here we see on the verb, the manta is the verb. The participle will be walking. It already means there was Vasya and Petya who were walking together and they got married. So in Khanty language, going together, walking together means also married because they don't have a dedicated verb for being married. Sometimes what we can see in this sentence could be considered as a category of evidentiality, a category of uncertainty. So we were not present at the wedding party, but we know some people who were there, or we know from this wedding from somebody. So these examples show that they describe our uncertainty and a certain unexpected discovery. Here we can add the verb look. Look, he's sleeping. He appears to be sleeping. Probably the situation could be that we were looking for somebody for a long time, and then we see that this person is sleeping. We open the door to the room and he's sleeping. Now let's talk about the lexics, the vocabulary of the Khanty language. Khanty, as other peoples of North Siberia, have a bear cult. And we can see the remnants of this in some European languages where the word bear is not used. So certain euphemisms are used. In the Russian language, a bear is the one who eats honey. In Germanic languages, this is the one who is brown. So in European languages, the bear cult is expressed in some euphemisms. For Khanty, it is the focus, it is the center of Khanty culture. The main celebration, holiday of Khanty, it is the occasion of bear hunting. It is so-called bear games. Here I give a link to the site, which is called Bear Games. And not only at the bear games, but generally speaking, the word bear is pronounced with great caution. Kazim women avoid mentioning bear. Sometimes they call it a small bear, a teddy bear. So these are indirect expressions which create a whole system of mystic substitutions for taboo words. This system is called the animal language, and some researchers counted up to 500 terms in this language. So the words of the everyday language in connection with the bear start having a special dedicated meaning. For instance, if you want to describe a head of a bear, you would say town. And bear's skin is called fur coat. A bear's guts are called lasso. and so on, so on. So for every part of the bear's body, there is a special euphemism, but there are also euphemisms for the actions of the hunter. If the hunter gets a bear, he will never say that he killed the bear. It's simply impossible to use this verb for the bear. So we can say that the bear was dropped or lowered. And the people cannot say that they did not skin the bear, they just stripped the bear. So you cannot use the word swim for the bear. The bear has a boat. That's the only way. The bear, the teddy bear, has a boat on each bank of the river, on each shore. In fact, it means that the bear can swim across the rivers. This cannot be described directly. You should always use a special dedicated language for this. At the end of my presentation, I would like to recommend you some materials if you want to deepen your knowledge or maybe introduction to the Khanty language. First of all, a grammar of Kazim dialect by Andrei Danilovich Kaksin and the dictionary of the language by Valentina Nikolaevna Solovar. And there is also Ugric Institute of Applied Research and Development. Their website contains a lot of materials on the Khanty language, folklore, and culture. There are certain literary works in Khanty language, and the website, internet site of the Khanty newspaper, Khanty Yasang, which covers all the events in the world of the native speakers of the Khanty language. Thank you.